Well, good morning. My name is Philip Mullins. I'm the student minister here. And what's fun about these people here, whenever I was in college, I went to a place called Johnson Bible College, and I have to do an internship for at least 3 months to graduate, and I was blessed with the amazing opportunity to do that internship in Australia. Now, when you get there, I was actually talking with an American woman who worked at the church I was going to be working for, and she's from America. She did an internship when she was in college as well at a place called, from Lipscomb University, which is in Nashville. And she met her husband there, and she ended up moving there with him. And so I got in contact with her, and then she set up an amazing summer for me. I was excited. She had me lined out 3 places to stay. There was actually, one place was supposed to be a bachelor pad. There were 4 other guys. And she wanted me to have different experiences. So the bachelor pad, and then there was going to be a couple who was into politics really, really big. Like, I'm pretty sure, if I remember right, she was a politician, the wife was. And then the first family I was staying with were called the Stanfords. Now, they were an amazing family. The husband and wife were named David and Rayma. They had 3 kids, Ryan, Brett, and Tash, which is short for Natasha. And Brett is actually the guy in the film who made the shot, who actually has the world record. They didn't show this one. The one from Switzerland, that guy's name was Derek Herron, and he was the other in the bachelor pad I was supposed to be staying with. But Brett, the summer that I was going to Australia, had actually just gotten married, and they were letting me use his room as the room that I was going to stay in. And it ended up, I was staying there the whole time at that one house, and I got to hang out with Brett pretty regularly. Now, Brett is... He's a physical therapist. He was also the student minister at the church I worked at for a little while, but he quit both of those jobs to focus on this How Ridiculous video, because they've been doing this for almost 6 years. And I'm telling you, what they can do is unreal. That's just a small portion of what they can do. They're all over YouTube. Again, they have the world record for the longest shot made, which is, I forgot what dam it was at. But man, it's on YouTube. It's unreal what they can do. But their whole mission is not trick shots. Their whole mission is about portraying God in light. I messaged him on Facebook and I said, hey, can you just give me just a couple line summary of How Ridiculous is? And this is what he wanted you to know. That it's to create a fun and entertaining, family-friendly content. We want to share our faith in a genuine and respectful way where possible, both in words and in actions. You see, they have been on BBC, they've been on ESPN, Bleacher Report, they've teamed up with people like Spalding, McDonald's, Burger King, KFC, like all kinds of different people, and they push Compassion International. That's their whole mission, is that they want to raise awareness for overseas missions, and obviously ours is Haiti. And they try to talk about the importance of it because they realize that life is more than just about sitting back and being comfortable. It's about going out, creating opportunities, and like he said, both in the world and in actions of what we can do. So if you want to check them out, they're all over YouTube. Just look up How Ridiculous. And if you want to know anything, I will message him and we'll see what we can do. Because since I know people who are famous, that makes me famous. At least that's how I'm feeling. So this is what we're going to roll with. So you're welcome for meeting me. Kidding, don't tell people you heard that at church today. But then let's pray and we'll open up. God, thank you for this morning and for who you are and for what you've done. God, you show us regularly how good you are. And God, whatever it is that you want us to hear today, God, allow my words not to be mine at all, but completely yours. And in Jesus' name I pray, amen. Now, Dave, every single Sunday, shows a picture of his grandson. I don't have a son, which means I don't have a grandson, but I do have this beautiful little boy. He takes his features after his mom, and he takes his genes and his athletic ability after me. So he's bound to be destroyed for the rest of his life if that's the case. But no, today I'm excited. As I was telling you guys about with Australia, there's a story I want to tell you about that happened to me when I was in Australia. So as an intern, you're required to do certain things you don't even know. Listen, you may think that just because Australia speaks English, Australians do, let me tell you, they have some weird words. And they have some weird things that go on. Like, for instance, the word ripper is pronounced ripper. And I got made fun of all the time because they said that I had a thick accent. And I've been to a couple places, and I'm from southern West Virginia, okay? You can't understand half the people from down there. So I didn't think I had that thick of one, but you learn pretty quickly that they make fun of people who say they're R's and they're L's. So as I'm going through all of Australia, I'm learning new things every single day. And one of these things is that the high schools, and it's winter at this point, okay? Our summer is their winter. So it was cold. When it got dark, it was cold. When it was during the day, it was probably mid-70s. I didn't pack a jacket. I had to go buy one when I landed because how cold I was. But as I'm sitting there, she said, the woman who's kind of my boss, she says, listen, one of the things that we ask you to do is to help lead a hiking trip. Now, how many of you guys have heard of Bear Grylls? Well, I said this joke in the first service and no one laughed because I'm not Bear Phils. My name's Philip. No one in the first service got it, or they really didn't think I was funny. So for my benefit, just giggle at me. So I don't scream outdoors. I don't scream in wilderness. I'll do it, but leading it's a different story. Julie did not marry me for my outdoorsmanship. I'll say that. But they asked me to lead this camping trip, which, hey, I'm in. I'll jump head first. I'll do anything. But Lipscomb University sends a team down every single summer. So at this point, it was I think it was early to mid-July, they asked us to do this wilderness thing. So what the high schools and stuff would do is that they would have a class dedicated specifically to this camping trip. Their whole semester was about planning nutrition, about what to eat out in the wild, what not to eat, how to pitch a certain tent, how to survive out in the wilderness. And their whole class was based off of this camping trip. So they sent all of their 10th and 11th graders to us, and they would hire a third-party camping company. And this company was a Christian-based thing. They would take all the initiative. They would provide all the tents. They would plan everything. All the kids had to do was show up and cook the food, do the nutrition, and everything else. Now, the people who led this third-party hiking company went to the church that I worked at, which is how I got pushed into it. But they were running out of people to help volunteer. So they they forced myself and the Lipscomb team to go out and to lead this stuff. None of us are outdoorsmen. It's okay. They said, it's super simple, it's fine. I'm like, all right, I'll do it. So then we get there, they split us up into 4 groups, and every single day, it was a 4-day, 3-night venture. And they said, every single day you will have a new thing you need to do. You'll do a high ropes and a low ropes course one day, you'll go hiking on a 2-mile hike one day, and you'll go canoeing and kayaking on the next. Again, I love doing anything. I love doing anything adventurous. I'll do it, but leading it's a different story. But I'm like, you know what, we'll do it. So we get this team, and I see I've got 14 students, 14 10th and 11th graders. You've got me, one other Lipscomb student. You had a chaperone who was a teacher, and you had a Canadian guy. I'm not sure where he's from or why he showed up, but he was there. Here's our picture. This is us. I got to know them really well. Really, really well. And let me tell you why. The first day, we had the high ropes and low ropes. So we did that. It was great. We got to the camping site. We put up all the tents. And then the next day was our hiking day. Hiking. 2 miles. Not too big of a deal. We wake up, 8 o'clock, we set out, and we go on this venture. And they say, if you follow this sign right here, you'll be good. You'll be good. I said, okay. So they sent me with a map, and they said, you're here, go here, follow that. Said, we got it. So we start out, 1 hour, we're good. 2 hours, we're good. 3 hours, you're good. It's fine. So at that point, paranoia starts kicking in like, hey, I think we zigged when we should have zagged. Like, is something going on here? So we stop to eat lunch, and we're taking a break, and all of us chaperones, the teacher, the Canadian, and me and the other Lipscomb student, she goes, hey, are we lost? I said, they put 2 Americans in charge of a map in Australia bush with 14 students. The chances are likely we are lost. So I said, listen, we got to keep pushing. So I'm high energy, so I'm making the students do all kinds of stuff throughout. Like talking we did, but I'm like, hey, look for a rock that looks like somebody or a face maybe. Find a stick shaped like a lever, like a letter, find the biggest leaf. And the kids are having a time, but then another hour passes, another passes, and I'm just like, okay, we are definitely lost. But we're going to keep pushing because we can't just sit here and wait. So then the teacher again, who is Australian, who is these kids' teachers. She goes, hey, I have a satellite phone. I'm like, that's great. And then I started thinking, I'm like, what are we going to tell them? Like, hey, where are you guys? Well, we're in the woods here. Like, I was like, no matter how much a satellite phone would do us good to let people know we're alive, we don't know what to say to them. Like, well, let's keep pushing. So we keep walking, and then a kid finally comes up and he goes, hey, are we lost? I looked down at my watch, and I'm like, it's 5 o'clock. Yes. We have been lost for hours. But we're going to keep going. So we keep walking, and at 7:30 p.m., we started this walk at 8 a.m. I find a road, and we end up calling them. We're like, hey, we're on this road, and we see some signs. And so we end up walking almost another mile down the road, and we see a sign. They're like, we know exactly where you are. We're on our way. At the end of it, I mapped it out. We walked over 10 hours, and we walked 16 miles. Come to find out, that picture up here, can you go back? That picture with the snake on it is actually called the Biblium Trail. It lasts 621 miles. So they say, you're good. Okay, well, I'm assuming you're really good. So this picture is us after we found the road, and we're looking at the map. I'm still lost. The next day, I almost get hypothermia because I fell out of the kayak and almost wanted to die there. But I refused to die in Australia. I refused. So what I'm saying is, if I am asking your students to go on a camping trip, don't send them. It's a bad idea. If you're thinking about saying yes, turn around, you've done something wrong. But it shows me something. Sometimes we get in leadership positions that we don't feel ready or called for. Sometimes we put ourselves in leadership roles that we aren't ready for, we don't feel qualified for, and yet God is putting us into doing something, and we choose whether we step up or not. We choose to accept it or not to. Because God will constantly place it. Listen, I have a hard time believing the narrative that some people are just the only leaders, that some people are born leaders. I fully believe that every one of us in here are leaders. I fully believe that. I believe that everybody in here has the ability inside of them to lead something. Now, how that may look is completely different. It may be you lead a business, or you may lead a group of people. You may just lead a small team for a small group. You might lead just your family, but yet leading your family is the most important leadership role you have in your life. Doesn't matter if you're a mom or a dad or a grandparent or even just a brother or sister, you are called to lead. And yet when we look at Scripture, I see leadership throughout all of it. You see, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we have the love chapter, right? Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy and does not boast. And where do we hear that the most? Where do we hear that? Weddings. We hear it at weddings. But what's funny about it is if you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 14, Paul is talking about leadership stuff. So when the Bible was written, there weren't books, chapters, and verses. There was just the book right there, and they were all one large story. So I have a hard time believing that Paul was like, okay, I'm going to talk about leadership in chapter 12, but I'm going to take a pause and talk about marriage in 13, and we're going to come back to leadership in 14. I just changed your whole life when you go to weddings and see, that's about leadership. Well, guess what? Marriage is leadership too. Paul wants leadership to be the most important thing that we can do in our marriages and our families. And yet, Paul says that the best way to lead is through love. The best way to lead is through love. So the New Testament has no example. We can all agree that Jesus shows us the prime example of leadership by the way that he lived his life, which was through love. But it doesn't stop there. We go back into the Old Testament, and we see Nehemiah, who wants to rebuild the wall of his people. You see Moses leading the people from Egypt. You see Noah building the ark. Abraham starting a nation. You see Adam overcoming and continuing his mission. Leadership is everywhere in Scripture. And yet we take it as it's only meant for certain people. But what I love most about leadership is this quote that I've heard is that leadership can never be perfected. It can only be developed. You're never going to reach the tip of leadership. You're never going to feel like you figured it out, because once you feel like that, you stop growing. And once you stop growing, the thing that you lead will start dying. Leadership is in every single one of us. But then that brings me to what I want to talk about today. But before we get to it, we have the book of Joshua. We've heard of Joshua, right? What's he most famous for? What's the story that brings Joshua out there? The Battle of Jericho. He walks around it 7 times and the walls come crumbling down. Joshua was the leader. But yet we pick up in Judges chapter 2, verse 8, and it says this: Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. Their leader's gone. He's just died. What they've been following is gone, and yet they're by themselves. So then we move down into verse 10, and it says this: after that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshiped various gods of the peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal in the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them. Just as he had sworn to them, they were in great distress. Their leader died in Joshua, and yet God allowed what they were causing on themselves to happen. They start serving other gods who weren't their God because their ancestors, it says, forgot to tell them about everything that God had brought them through, that everything that God had brought them to. So then you see you see where he's picking up with Judges is they are completely being defeated. Completely being defeated. But then we move to verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of these raiders. Israelites were messing up, making tons of mistakes. God delivered judges to help save them. You figure that would be enough? Absolutely not. Verse 17, yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's command. Exhilarating news. You get a judge, God saves you, and yet you still mess up. Verse 18, whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies, as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. In verse 19, but when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Joshua dies. People start doing whatever they want to do. God sends them a judge. God's with the judge as long as they're alive, but once that judge is gone, they go back to the ways. Listen, I am a dean at Howes Mill for middle schoolers. Middle school. I could leave it right there and you'll know what I'm talking about. But this year was especially funny for me. Usually whenever you tell middle schoolers something, they'll either like listen to you and then just be like, nah, I'm good. Like, that doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not going to do it. And I get that. But this year was one of the first years that I have ever experienced where I was talking to them face to face. I'm not saying every middle schooler, but, it's just that age. But I was talking to the middle schoolers face to face, and then they would just be like, what'd you say? And then I'd have to repeat it, and then just be like, no, you're still doing it wrong, keep going. So I kind of understand where God's feeling. I'm not saying I understand how God feels, but where you're saying, hey, you need to be here at 5:30 for dinner. So why am I having to come back into here to remind you for the 4th time today that dinner's here? Because then you're going to complain about being hungry, and then I'll be like, you missed dinner. And it just is this continuous thing here. So God's saying, I'm giving you a judge, pay attention. So he ends up giving them a couple, but then we get to my amazing person. We get to the guy that I have grown up and I've just loved. He's known for a couple of different things, but his name's Gideon. I love Gideon because he comes in, he gets the call, does the work, boom. But it doesn't start out that way so easy. We pick up In Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 6, it says this. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. And for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Essentially, the Israelites are having to hide because of what's happening. Verse 3, whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern people invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza and did not spare a living thing for Israel. Neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them on their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. So when we first pick up with where Gideon is, the Israelites are having to hide everything they own, including themselves, to keep from being destroyed. Israelites are alone. But then we get the call. Move on down to verse 11. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. Essentially, when we see Gideon, he's taking all the food for him and his family, and he's trying to hide it. He's wanting to hide his food because of what's going on. But then we see verse 12. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Now, if you're Gideon and you see an angel of the Lord come down, you're probably like, I'm in. I'm in. You don't even got to say anything. Hey, hush, I got it. I'm in. What we need to do. But Gideon doesn't do that. Look at verse 13. "Pardon me, my Lord," Gideon replied, "but if the Lord is with us, why has all of this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and has given us into the hand of Midian." Now, Gideon does something that I fell in love with the moment I heard it. He does something that we shy away from because we're scared of the result. He asks the hard questions. You see, as people, and as people on this earth that are trying to follow Christ, or maybe you're trying to figure out who Christ is, you have tons of questions. We're not perfect. We don't know every answer. We're not supposed to know every answer, but yet we will allow our questions to bother us and guilt us so bad that we refuse to move forward in our walk with God, because we will stand our ground and say, until I get this answer, I can't follow you. Until I figure out what it is that you're trying to tell me, or maybe you're trying to figure out, until I figure out why my mom or my dad died, I can't be here. Until I know what happens immediately after I die, I can't follow you. Until I get an answer for A, B, and C, I'm not going to take the test. And that's hard for us because there's so much unknown. There's so many things we don't know, and God's saying, you're not supposed to. And that's hard for us. So we have been told, or we've had this mentality for most of our life, that we don't ask God questions. We can't ask God what he's doing because that would show a lack of faith. And I refuse to believe that that's a lack of faith to have questions. We all have questions. We all want answers to things that we will never understand. But my goodness, God is bigger than your questions. God is bigger than your questions, so stop telling your questions, stop telling God how big your questions are, and start telling your questions how big God is. Stop thinking that your questions are going to determine your faith and that God's going to be like, you need to trust me more. Listen, that will always be the narrative. We can always trust more. We can always have more faith. We can always do that. And all God wants you to say is, be real with me. Ask me. Because I promise you, when you have those questions, God shows up. It may not be how you expect it, and it may not be the answer that you want, but yet God says, I am with you, mighty warrior. And that's exactly what he says. So then we move down into the next verse with what God says back. The Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you? You see, what I love about Gideon's leadership here is that he could not buy into this. until he got some kind of response. And rightfully so. God, this angel of the Lord comes down and says, you're going to save Israel. And yet he's looking at it, he's like, for years, we've been getting beat up by the Midianites, and now we're scared for our lives. So if you are so good, where are you? And God's reply is, am I not sending you? See, Gideon refused to let his questions hold him back from what could be. He asked the hard questions. The answer probably isn't what he's expected. Why? God didn't answer it. Gideon says, why has this happened to us? And God simply says, go in the strength you have. Go in the strength you have. You see, questions can't hold you back. Doubts can't hold you back. Because the more you think about it, the more you'll talk yourselves out of it. And that's where you get messed up at. Having questions, having doubts is not the problem. Staying put with those and letting them keep you from following God is where it becomes wrong. Don't let them go unspoken. God already knows them. He's dealt with them, and I promise you, you're not the only one to have those thoughts. So never, ever feel like it's alone. But that's what makes God's response so much. Go in the strength you have and save Israel. But Gideon's not done. Look down at verse 15. Pardon me, my Lord, seems to be the narrative. Gideon replied, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. And I love that. Why? Because Gideon's basically saying, I'm unusable. I'm nothing. I'm the weakest in the weakest family, in the weakest tribe. Why would you pick me? Why am I here? Why would you even choose me? And I have a hard time believing that he's the only one who's felt this way. How many of us have felt that way? Whenever I'm walking through the Australian bush with a bunch of kids and we're lost, I'm telling myself, I'm not cut out for this. I'm not. But those kids today still have me on Facebook and will message me periodically and just be like, hey, how you doing? And they've graduated college and everything else, and I realize it's not always about the journey. It's about the relationships that happen during the journey. You see, because when we look at Gideon, he's saying, I'm the smallest here, and some of us in here feel the smallest. Some of us in here feel like we're useless, we're unusable because of our past, because of our questions, because of our family past. And let me tell you, God does not worry himself with what you've done. He worries about where you're going to be. And the question is how long are you going to hold on to where you are? See, Gideon realized that his leadership could be something, and God knew it. And even though Gideon's past was probably a little messed up, because as you'll read later, his dad has altars set up for Baal and the Ashtoreths, which means that he's not serving God. So he grew up in a home that wasn't serving God, according to the context, and yet God is saying, this is your moment. Are you going to take it or not? Are you going to take it or not? Which brings me to my only point for today, and we're trying to keep the message central. In order for us to lead, no matter what leadership role that might be in, we need to remember who God is. Look at verse 16, the first part. After Gideon's question of, I'm the weakest, how can I save Israel? He says, I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites, leaving none alive. He's saying, I am with you. You will do extraordinarily more. Move back up to verse 7 with what the Israelites are trying to, the Israelites are talking to God, and this is God's response to them, verse 7 of chapter 6. When the Israelites cried out to the Lord, he said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says, and pay attention to how many I's are in here, God talking. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians. I delivered you from the hand of all the oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God, who do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me. You see, we have a problem today, and I'm going to say in America, that's where we are. We forget how much leadership potential we have. See, I feel like we've missed so much of what that could be because we just want to follow. And I'm here to tell you the most important leadership role you have is for your family. You don't need to lead a huge business. You don't need to be the CEO of anything spectacular. You don't need to be able to speak up on stage and have that ability or that extrovert mentality. You might be the most introverted person you know. You might feel like you're the weakest person in the weakest family, in the weakest city, in the weakest state, in the weakest part of the country. You might feel unusable. You might have so many questions that you don't know if you're for it, and yet God is saying, I am with you. I am with you. Because I see dads and I see moms out here. I don't know if I talk about it. Last night, my best friend from back home, they had their baby shower. She was due August 23rd, so Julie and I were going to drive down for the baby shower. At 8 o'clock that morning, I get a text from him. He goes, hey, baby's on its way. I said, so we're having the baby shower while the baby's being delivered? And the answer is yes. Yes, she is. And it was awesome. The mom and dad weren't even in there. So we ate cake on behalf of them, and I'm okay with that. But they ended up having the baby. Everything was healthy. But then I'm looking out, and Joy and I are getting ready to leave, and I've just held the baby, and they're getting ready to send a baby out to Women's and Children's, as we're seeing. And this is down in Princeton. And I see a baby in a huge incubator, and they're getting ready to put it on the ambulance to send it back up here. And it had every single trait of it, the parents being drug users. And that's common in our area. And so I have the questions of, God, why would you let this happen? That baby's gonna grow up with so many problems and so many troubles. Like, why do the parents have to be so selfish sometimes? And the only thing I keep reverting back to is, I am with you. If we want the narrative to change over potential of families leading through love, if we want to see things change, it starts with the people in the church. It starts with us looking at what Jesus has done and doing our best to portray that every single day. And no, you're not going to do it perfectly. You never will. I don't care how great you think you are, you're going to mess up. And yet when I look at Jesus, I see somebody who led through love. I see that our families are suffering because we forget that. So when I look at Gideon, don't let questions keep you from following God. Don't let your past or your present or what you've been through keep you from leading. Let God do everything through you. You just be prepared for whatever he'll ask you to do, because you won't feel called every single time. You won't feel prepared. You'll feel underqualified. And yet he's saying all along, I am with you, mighty warrior. Everyone in here has the potential to lead. The question is will you step up and do it? We're getting ready to enter into our last song, and my prayer for us is that we just go home and we just figure out, God, what do you want us to do? It may be just leading one particular student. That's discipleship. It might be something huge. I don't know. But I know that everything you do needs to be filtered through what Jesus has done. So if you have any questions, if you have a decision you want to make, if you want to just come up here and pray, I highly encourage you to just do it. Joel will be over here. I'll be over here. We're here to talk to you. But let's worship. You may stand.